charlar con Barry Sinervo, que es un biólogo evolutivo, herpetólogo para más datos, que estudia desde teoría de juegos, genética de poblaciones, comportamiento, la fisiología de los reptiles, todo ahora bajo el impacto climático. Conocí a Barry hace unos años en Puerto Madryn y me impactó tanto académicamente como personalmente. Académicamente fue él el que me introdujo a la idea de la declinación mundial de reptiles debido al cambio climático. Su vida cambió radicalmente después de que le diagnosticaran cáncer. Sin embargo, su entusiasmo y su trabajo no han cambiado. Es más, se han incrementado. Vamos a hablar ahora del cambio climático, vamos a jugar a piedra, papel y tijera y nos contará sobre su visión de la importancia de la matemática en sí. También vamos a ver parte de su charla TED de 2015, antes de su diagnóstico de cáncer, y le preguntaremos sobre sus conexiones con argentinxs. Gracias, Barry, por concedernos tu tiempo.
Barry, first of all, thank you for participating in this course of Reptilia. Somebody told me that the climate change is an hoax. It's not true. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think 99% of the world's scientists are convinced about climate change. And in my own work, the lizards tell me that the warming is happening, and it's true that we're seeing warming and extinctions from that warming.
And we know it because of facts, of data. It's not a sensation, isn't it?
Yeah. We know over the historical period, 1975 to the present, that it has warmed by a certain amount. And that the only explanation that we have right now that's plausible is from greenhouse gases, both carbon and methane and other more minor components. Now, you can link that warming directly to physiology, and we can predict extinctions of local populations. And that's what we did in our research. So I am totally convinced that the data and the predictions are true.
So I'm going to tell you about something that you may not be aware of, that we're entering into a new phase of biological diversity. It's what I refer to and others refer to as the sixth mass extinction. Now, I'm a biologist and a mathematician, and I work on lizards, so I'm going to try to get you into the skin of a lizard really simply so you can understand why it's so easy for us to see this pattern with lizards. And so if you can imagine that a lizard is just a perfect thermometer. Here it's flattened out on the rock and it's really trying to get warm. But if it gets too warm, it's going to crawl under that rock. And the problem for the lizards is that if they have to crawl under that rock for very long, they're going to go extinct. As in, every day they have to crawl under the rock for about 4 hours. Past certain limits, they're just going to go extinct. And I'm going to tell you this story. Now, what if I tell you that not just lizards, but all of the world's biodiversity is at stake? And what if I tell you that everybody in this room, everybody on the planet is responsible, and we're responsible for the solution? 97% of the climate scientists are in agreement about climate change happening. And in some way, the models we've developed for now predicting extinctions of lizards on the planet are a validation of that. I'm going to just tell you a very brief story about the beginning of our kind of comprehension of the magnitude of this extinction process. I was in a restaurant with Fausto Mendez de la Cruz, who happens to be the second herpetologist in Mexico, and he's charged with cataloging and archiving all of the biodiversity in Mexico. And when we started trading notes and came to this realization that we were now beginning this sixth mass extinction, and we were seeing populations of lizards vanish in Mexico and all throughout the world, Fausto turned to me and he said, "Barry, you punched me in the gut. If you don't feel that gut punch from my talk, then I just haven't done my job." So this is the history of metazoans, things like us, all the animals on the planet. And this is the number of families, a measure of biodiversity. And what you see is that throughout the ages, we've had 5 mass extinctions. What makes this 6th mass extinction over here, the one that's now plummeting us downwards, is the rapidity of this 6th. The first 5 took tens of millions of years to kind of unravel ecosystems. And sure enough, the one that you're all familiar with, the asteroid impacting the planet, wiped out a whole bunch of things right away, but a lot of the biodiversity actually went extinct over tens of millions of years. This one's happening, and it's happening right now. This is a kind of a wake-up call when I saw this for me. This is the probability that the average summer temperature at century's end will be warmer than the highest temperature ever recorded. Now, in Santa Cruz, that might be us living in conditions that are more like San Diego. But if you live in a place like Modesto that experiences, high temperatures of 110 now, an average of 110 is devastating. Now, this also brings me to another part of my story. I go away for 2 months of the year, and that's not sustainable if you have a family, so my family travels with me to these remote locations. And my wife often asks me, how on earth is it that we end up in the hottest places for our vacation? And I tell you, it's the mathematics of climate change, baby. I'm like on the front line, the trenches. I got to see where they're going extinct and where they're not. And that leads me to all of this. These patterns. We go to Melbourne, and it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Melbourne's in the southern part of Australia. We're in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And people are rioting in the streets because it's so hot and there's no water. Sao Paulo, people are rioting and trying to take control of their ecosystems back. Not only is there climate change, but they've deforested the ecosystems upon which their aquifers depend. So this is the quick pattern of those extinctions that we see now in lizards. In red are the areas where there are hotspots, in the Amazon, in equatorial regions, but there are extinctions all over that we can measure. And one of these lizards has actually gone extinct already. This is the pattern of extinctions right now in 2010. 2050, we're going to see 6% of the world species of lizards go extinct. By 2080, it's going to be about 30%. And we're actually going to see a large number of lizard families wink out of existence. If we can change the climate change engine, which is CO2 production, we can actually turn it around, and we will be able to hold it at 2050. That's kind of this magic goal that we have as climate scientists. It's not just about lizards, right? These are the plants that are dying off at lizard extinction sites that I've seen personally. If you go to a lizard extinction site, the entire ecosystem is unraveling. Animals, birds, amphibians, insects, they're all beginning this process, and it's happening right now. Just to give you a brief conclusion here midway, yes, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and we've got to do something about it.
I think that the politician power should do something about the science and the environmental science. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that those politicians, be they in Argentina or the United States or anywhere, that don't believe in the power of science to help with human policy decisions are very, very shaky ground. because the future is coming very quickly. And without understanding climate change, the people of Argentina will be probably very negatively affected by the future. But with enough time, we can plan ahead. So I would encourage the people to challenge the powers of their own political apparatus. And if the politicians don't have a forward-looking view, replace them with the democratic vote.
Mhm. It seems that climate change, being a global problem, seems that should need a global solution, and nobody individually can make a solution, nor USA, nor China by itself, but a global thing. But nevertheless, I hear that you predict, or no, you preach that the individual or smallest action also will help to solution the problem. Is that the way?
Well, absolutely. Everybody owns the problem. Everybody should contribute to it. So I have a list of things that people can do to help change their own carbon footprint.
These are the simple steps you can do. I did them. It's a simple experiment, and you should do it in this collaboration. I just tried to reduce my own carbon footprint by 15% a year. And if you do it year after year, you get yourself down below 50%. Grow your own backyard produce. 85% of the energy is the food. In this food is oil that we burn to move it to market. Insulate your house. Insulate the crawl space too. We no longer turn on our heater in the winter. Ride your bike. Buy local. Try vegetarian meals. Repurpose old things. New stuff just uses too much carbon. And the most important thing is to demand change from our government, industry, and others in our community in a radical global collaboration. This is a collaboration between the generations. We have to leave a really nice planet. Just to think about this, if I'd have known that I was going to take my wife to these really hot vacation spots, I didn't really think about that literally, right? But that's what happened. What we want to think about really is that collaboration that we have with our own children, and everybody's children, and everybody on the planet. It's the most important collaboration we have. We've got to change climate change.
But many people are also selfish, and they won't change unless it's mandated. So we do need political process in this to change things from the outside of an individual, things that they have to do.
Going to a more specific issue about reptiles, how can this global warming affect reptiles? Because people will say, okay, reptiles are ectothermic, so if the Earth is warmer, better for them. Is that reasoning good or not?
Well, that's, I'll have to say, it's kind of a naive perspective. Certainly at the northern edge of a species range, it'll be better, and there will be range expansions. But at the southern or the warm temperature range in the northern hemisphere, now this is reversed, where you are in Argentina, right? The further away we get from the equator, things will improve for reptiles. But at the equator, there are many reptiles that are really close to their physiological limits. And a little bit of warming will wipe them out. And as you go further away from the equator, they will be wiped out as it warms. So, paradoxically, even though they're ectotherms, everything has a physiological limit, and the southern range limit near the equator, or the northern range limit if you're in the southern hemisphere near the equator, is at that limit. They can't get any higher. So we will see extinctions, and we already have.
The problem with the reptiles is similar to that of amphibians, the global decline, amphibian global decline, because with amphibian also there is a disease, this chytridiomycosis, and here we don't have a disease.
Well, we don't know yet till we don't have disease. With amphibians, we know this, that climate change has interacted with disease. So it's not simply disease. A colleague of mine and a good friend, Jason Rohr, and his students showed that there was a very strong link between the interaction between climate change and disease. Now with reptiles, we know that climate change dominates, but we're finding evidence that disease can also play a role, but not as strong a role as in the case of the amphibians.
You predict that the changes in temperature will make that reptiles have less time to do the things for living like reproduction or eating because they narrow the activity times. Is that true?
Yes. This I know from the point of view of mathematics. Many things are diurnally active, right? So you have a certain period of the day when animals can be active. They wake up and they go to sleep. What's happening is those limits really don't change, and the warm part of the day is expanding and taking away from the time that they have to be active. So they are going extinct from less hours of activity. Now, we also show that things that are nocturnal aren't really as affected because it's getting warmer at night and that may be better. So nocturnal things in our paper we show don't have the very big risk of climate change like geckos.
Good, but those species which places are warmer can't move southern or northern or going to higher altitudes or something like this, or the change is so fast that they will not be able to move the actual distribution.
They won't be able to move north or south very much because we have now in place a network of roads and human habitation that has disrupted normal patterns of movement, and there isn't enough time. Now, going from lower elevations to higher is more possible, but we also show in our paper that the high elevation species are being invaded by low elevation species. So they will go extinct because of the movement of more warm adapted types, making the problem even worse. Yeah, to the point where they are now stuck on a mountaintop and then they're wiped out when the warm adapted species wipes them out. That's happening now. In our science paper, we showed that 7 of 8 extinctions that we couldn't explain in Mexico from physiology changing were due to the invasion of a warm adapted competitor. 16 extinctions we saw from the point of both physiology and competition.
Good. And Barry, tell me, are we, with the amphibians, for example, is paradigmatic the case of the golden frogs of Costa Rica that became extinct. What about reptiles? Are we know about real extinction, or is just a presumption of extinction? You have studied a lot of populations all over the world, I know.
Yeah. So we are near the limit for some species in Mexico. We only know of a few sites for a species called Galapagos goldmani. But those sites are mainly in areas where there is drug trade. So we can't go and verify its status. That's in northern Mexico. In the Yucatan, there are some species that are also near the limit, and we may see them go extinct, or they have already got extinct in this decade. So we're starting to see true species level extinctions as a real possibility.
And I know that you are the spearhead of a large amount of scientists that you gather around the world. Even some Argentinian colleagues that are working with you in these subjects. Could you tell us who is working with you from Argentina?
There are many. One of the groups is led by Nora Ibargoyen-Goyatilla.
Nora Ibargoyen-Goyatilla.
Yeah, and then another group, these were both groups on the original paper, is Luciano Aviles and Mariana Miranda in Puerto Madryn. And they have other colleagues around Argentina that they're collaborating with as well. So we have many groups in Argentina working on this global collaboration.
And you are gathering data from all over the world, isn't it?
Yes.
Are you?
On all continents that you have reptiles, not on Antarctica, but now we are working all over Eurasia, China, Europe, Africa, Australia, all throughout Indonesia and India, North and South America, and even throughout Central America.
I have the honor to meet Eric Pianka in Austin 2 years ago, and he impressed me. From him, I learned what important are the database to know what is changing, because do we know how are the populations before climate change? Have we enough data to make an evaluation if they are going better or worse?
Let me give you an example from Eric Pianka's own work. He published 3 papers on African ecosystems, North American desert ecosystems, and Australian ecosystems. And with Ray Huey, they did a lot of work in South Africa and Namibia and Botswana. We have resurveyed many of Eric's and Ray Huey's sites in South Africa, and we predicted a lizard, Maroli's suborbitalis, should be extinct. And if you go look at my Twitter account, we now know that it is now extinct from 60,000 square kilometers of sites in South Africa that we knew of where
sadly, Eric data is something rare around the world. In Argentina, we have no information about the size of populations or the ecology. We need that more students gather such data.
Yeah. I relied in our science paper on Luciano and Mariana's surveys that were not yet published. I didn't publish any of their data, but they had 7,000 sites where they had surveyed many species, and that data was invaluable. And Nora had many similar sites, and many of the data in the South America were from people that had worked for years and had not yet published all that. So that is critical work that we need to do to gather new surveys and surveys of all those old sites.
You also know, because your theory of game theory applied to reptiles with rock, scissor, and paper game with reproductive modes. I view some documentary in the internet that explain quite well the rock, scissor, and paper game for reptiles with Utah stansburiana is stansburiana.
We were the first to discover the rock, paper, scissors game in nature, in the lizard Utah stansburiana. And it's very...
Out here in California's serene Central Valley, there's a game underway. One animal is locked in a perpetual, unwinnable cycle of rock, paper, scissors. A three-way competition that's been raging for millennia. Meet the side-blotched lizard, named for that patch of dark color on its side. These lizards are all one species, but they have three different colors. You see it on their throats. Some are more orange, others more blue or yellow. Each male lizard has a different trick for getting a mate that corresponds to their color. Orange, these guys are the brutes, the meatheads. Bigger, stronger. They set up territories with lots of females and defend them aggressively. Yellow, these guys are sneaky. They don't try to hold territories. Instead, they hide and then dart in as often as they can for a chance to mate with an unguarded female. Blues have a whole other strategy. They're monogamous. They put all their focus on just one female. Researchers at UC Santa Cruz figured out the game. So here's how it plays out, the rock, paper, scissors part. Orange beats blue. They're bigger and more aggressive. Yellow beats orange because oranges can't keep track of all those females. It's easy for yellows to sneak by them. Blue beats yellows because blues are vigilant. Yellows can't fool them. And while we're on these blues, because they're monogamous, they aren't competitive with other blues. They cooperate with each other, make friends. They even warn their blue neighbors when intruders are nearby. See those little push-ups? In fact, they've been known to risk their own lives for other blues. It's called altruism. Even Darwin didn't imagine this could happen. Anyway, you might think that over time, one color would prevail. Like those altruistic blues would win. The whole species would gradually become blue. But with these guys, it doesn't happen. Each color is kept in check by one of the other colors. And if one of the colors starts to fall behind, the females bring it back in line, because they tend to prefer whatever color male is most rare that season. So if blues are getting the upper hand, females go for yellows or oranges. If If the females were to have a change of heart and stop going for the underdog, well, then one color might win out. Another might disappear entirely. In other words, the species would evolve, change. But for the last 15 million years, that hasn't happened. It's an ancient game of Rochambeau with no end in sight.
And it's very simple. Rock is a very aggressive orange male, and they're all color-coded. So that strategy beats scissors. So these are males that are monogamous, and they are beaten by rock. They have less testosterone, more testosterone. So rock wins. Now rock is beaten by paper. Paper pretends that they're females, and they get in and they copulate with all the females in the orange male's harem, and these are yellow. So paper beats rock. Now paper is beaten by scissors, and scissors is blue. And what's amazing is that now we've even worked out how climate change impacts this game, and we have published on that. Yellow mainly gets its fitness during the warm parts of the season. So in the northern parts of the range, the strategy yellow is ejected, and you're just left with scissors and rock. And that's because of the interaction of climate change and the game theory equations. That's in a paper in 2017 that we published. So now we have game theory for different types. But the lizards, rock, paper, and scissors are like different species. So now we have universal equations like the Volterra equations that even describe different species interactions. So that game is a very useful one for understanding even ecosystem level dynamics. And those are the papers I am writing right now.
And really, that idea applies not only for colors and reproduction, but in several other characteristics of animals that make better fits.
Yeah. If you buy my book, Evolution, the Theory of Games, Evolutionary Game Theory in Natural, Virtual, and Social Worlds, I write about a case in which you have aposomatic salamanders, Bayesian mimics. Aposomatic are toxic. Bayesian mimics are harmless, but they signal that they're toxic. And then cryptic salamanders, that game with predators turns out to be rock, paper, scissors. The whole world is made up of rock, paper, scissors.
How can it can get to an equilibrium? Because if one have a slight advantage over the other, it seems that the evolution goes to favor just only one, and the other two will disappear. But here there is an equilibrium.
Yeah, that's it will happen. That's the true nature of the rock, paper, scissors. So it constantly cycles. So the cycle is equilibrium.
So it's a dynamic equilibrium that is changing all the time. It's not a static equilibrium. A question that I didn't make before. The reptile decline, when we began to notice about that? In the 90s, the 80s?
So, in 1998, my good friend, household Menez de la Cruz went looking for lizards of a certain species, Philophorus mucronatus, and he found that it was so hot in that year, the hottest year ever, and the lizard, that species, stopped reproduction at many sites in Mexico, and later we found those sites went extinct. Now, at the same time, in 1998, in the Caribbean next door, the very first coral bleaching event occurred. And that was because of a collision between the effects of the Enzo, the El Nino, and the North Atlantic Oscillation led to an extreme warm spell that began to precipitate the extinctions. So we saw changes in the land and sea. So those extreme events led to the onslaught of climate change. It turns out that I tried to make the mathematics as simple as I could. Now I know that we were essentially right in all the details. We've done more complex mathematical models. Nothing has really changed. I published a paper in 2018 where I merged the model of physiology with biophysics. A good friend of mine, Michael Carney, generated a database called microclimes, and his data validated our methods, and we show now that we have kind of a more synthetic model. But I wanted the model to be simple enough to apply to all of the world's lizard families. And now we have models that work on reptiles, amphibians, mammals, birds, and fish, and plants, kind of universal equations. And we're publishing on all of those, showing that they really are universal equations that we can now write in very simple terms. I was trained as a mathematician, so I know how to try to make it explain as simple as I can. And it's explained in detail in our game theory book. That you don't need to have any more than a university education in undergraduate biology with some math, and you can understand.
There is some subject that you want to talk for those students. Those are almost graduate students, so are almost finishing the career.
I think me being trained as a mathematician early allowed me to see the world in a very different way. And I encourage all the new students to take a few more courses in mathematics as best as they can, and they will benefit enormously from that. I have never stopped studying mathematics, and I just continue to learn more and more and more. And I have very good friends that are my teachers even now in mathematics. So keep learning those things and merge it with biology, and it will serve you well.
Good. That's a very good advice. And the science of the future is the science of the big data. And you are dealing with big data. You are dealing with big data of temperatures, not only the big data of Facebook or the Amazon or Google big data. The biological big data are very important to analyze in a different way.
Yeah, and I have grants submitted for training students in big data. And if I get those, Regardless of whether I get those, I will continue to go around the world and give workshops like I give next December in Bariloche on the big data, the equations, the universal equations of climate change and ecosystem dynamics.
So really, I appreciate and I'm grateful for your attention to us.
Gracias, mi amigo. And I look forward to seeing you next year when I travel in Argentina.
I hope so.